And if you are joining us tonight and already putting your comments into the Facebook feed, just know that I'm looking at two screens here. I'll do my best to get to you. But if we don't, we will be following up after our discussion. So I don't know. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. So let's get started. Welcome everyone to Debunking Desire with Dr. Lori Brotto. As I mentioned, we've been looking forward to this night for a very long time. We had over 500 women sign up for this special event. And I think one of the reasons it's so special is because in 2019, our number one conversation in the Menopause Chicks private community was libido. Women have a lot of questions. It came up over 9,000 times last year. So we are really excited and pleased to have our special guest with us tonight and to debunk this conversation and to hopefully leave you with some new information and quality education, because you deserve quality of life. So let's get started. I'm not really one for traditional introductions, but our guest tonight has a very long list of accolades attached to her name. And those include Dr. Lori Brotto is a psychologist. She's a professor at UBC. She's a sexual health researcher. She's a leader in Canada and around the world in women's health and sexual health. She's a fierce women's advocate. She's a mentor, an author of the best-selling book, Better Sex Through Mindfulness. She wrote a quote on the back of my book, Mokita. She's a mother and a daughter and a sister and a wife and a friend. She was a panelist at the Mokita 2019 event last summer with Jan Arden. And recently, Dr. Lori Brotto and her team have unveiled an initiative called Debunking Desire. So we are so pleased to welcome you, Lori. Thank you for taking the time to join us tonight.
Oh my gosh, I'm beyond words, and I share in your excitement, Shirley. So excited to be here. Can't wait to get through as many questions as we can.
Yeah, let's do this. So you know me, I'm kind of a stickler for words and definitions, and that's really where I would love to kick this off tonight, because your initiative is called Debunking Desire, and women in our community have mentioned, as I said, nearly 9,000 times last year, the word libido. So can you please unpack those words and tell us the definitions?
Yes, great place to start. And I think words are really important, because one of the things we know when we talk about sexual health with our healthcare providers, we actually have a lot of discomfort using words like vagina, vulva, even sexual desire or sexuality more generally. So libido is actually quite an old term. It is probably one of the most common terms that individuals use when they're referring to interest in sex or lack of interest in sex. In the more kind of clinical community or circles, we use libido a little bit less, and I'll tell you why. Libido really implies, it has this kind of historic notion of something that lives within us. There's this libido in us, and this libido needs to get out. And therefore, if we have problems with sexual interest, the belief is that we've lost this libido entity. And so we prefer terms like sexual desire, sexual interest, sexual motivation, because those terms really convey what sexual desire is. It's something that happens in response to something else. And I'll give you a crystal clear example of that. We feel happy when great things happen to us. Someone says something nice, someone does something nice. It elicits happiness, and other emotions work the same way, and sexual desire works the same way. So I'm going to use desire throughout our conversation. Feel free to use whatever words you would like, Shirley, especially if the audience resonates with that. But the important thing, I think maybe the first take home point, is that desire is something that can come and go. It can wax and wane. And really importantly, it's something that's really sensitive to what's in our environment, what's pulling desire out of us. It's not an on-off switch.
I think that's a great myth to debunk right off the top. It's not an on-off switch. And thank you for that explanation. And I will try to use desire too, but I might go back and forth. So your latest research and your website is called Debunking Desire. It's debunkingdesire.com, and we'll put this up in the comments. So can you please explain why desire needs to be debunked?
Yes. Oh, so many reasons. I mean, first of all, our society continues to perpetuate false ideas, false beliefs about desire. So, for example, one of the more common things that I hear women tell me in my clinical setting is, I shouldn't have to plan sex, right? And if I plan sex, and if I talk about it with a partner in advance, it suddenly takes away from the fun, the pleasure, the beauty, the spontaneity in having sex. And that's one of many, many problematic myths that exist about sexual desire. First of all, I often say, what else in your life do you engage in that's not planned? Pretty much everything we do that's important and of value to us is planned. So we need to debunk myths that suggest that if you plan sex, that there's something wrong with you, there's something wrong with your sex life. So the whole purpose of the Debunking Desire campaign was really to use social media as a way of sharing the science. And as a researcher, that's a lot of what I do is contributing to science and new knowledge, and taking that information and sharing it with as many women and people as possible as a way of debunking harmful ideas and myths that they might have.
I like it. I like it. And you just mentioned social media, so we should as well. So your Instagram account is at UBC SHL, which stands for Sexual Health Lab. So at UBC SHL. And I want to share that because you've got some great graphics. And at debunkingdesire.com, you also have some great guides and memes that we can share and take this information that we're about to learn tonight and pass it on with our friends and our networks.
Definitely. Yes. Our team has put together a great little toolkit, and we'd encourage all your followers and viewers and listeners to share it with others as well.
Cool. Now we got some questions in advance, Lori, and I'm trying to keep an eye on the feed here to make sure that we can address some of the questions live. Well, this is a question I ask everyone, and I usually save it for the end, but I'm concerned that people, may not watch till the end. So I'm going to start right off the top. What's the one thing that you want women who are in perimenopause or menopause right now to know about sexual desire?
Oh my gosh, I love that question. I wasn't ready for it, but let's dive right in. Well, I'm going to start by debunking a myth right off the bat, and that is that your sex life ends with menopause.
Thank you.
It is such a myth. It is not supported by any of the scientific evidence, and yet I think there's still societal beliefs that you better enjoy your sexual desire when you're in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, because as soon as menopause hits, that's it. We dry up, we lose interest, and we start to sleep in separate beds from our partners. The data simply don't support that whatsoever. In fact, for a lot of women, the transition through the perimenopause into the postmenopause period comes with changes in her role, in her identity. A lot of women regain a new sense of confidence and vitality and power. And femininity, all of which can directly fuel her sexual desire. Now, yes, hormones are important. They absolutely are important. And one of the concrete changes we know that does happen with the peri and postmenopause is that there's a drop in our circulating levels of estrogen. And for a lot of women, that can impact vaginal dryness. So it can make the vaginal walls less elastic, less likely to lubricate naturally. And for some women, if that's painful, that can impact her interest and motivation for sex. It's also can be treated, can be corrected. And so it's not the case that those changes directly diminish a woman's desire. So let's just knock that one out of the park completely.
Great answer. Thank you. So I'm going to go to one of the questions that we got, and I'm sure you're not surprised by this at all, but women want to know, is there a way to boost their desire, particularly as they are navigating perimenopause?
Yeah. So again, if we come back to this idea that desire is just like happiness, it's just like sadness, it's something that can be elicited, then it suggests to us that we need to start to really pay attention, if we're not already aware, what are the elicitors of our own desire. So let me give you a couple of examples.
Okay.
Sometimes those elicitors can be touch. So some women who are very responsive to touch will say, when I or a partner start touching me in a certain way, bam, it elicits my interest in sex. Now, the thing with touch is that with age and with changes in life stages, our sensitivity in our skin receptors also change. So some women will say, a lot of women will say, a certain touch that was really pleasurable at a different stage of my life is no longer pleasurable, or perhaps even painful. And so that's where an awareness of our body and an ability to communicate with a partner, if you have a relationship, to say, that no longer feels good, but hey, do this instead. This feels really good. So touch might be something that elicits interest in sex. For other women, it's not touch, it might be sounds, right? It might be listening to a certain song. It might be hearing peaceful sounds in the background. For other women, it might be very visual, right? And there are many, many women who respond very positively to erotica. Not pornography, those are different. And when I say erotica, I mean female friendly, female focused, typically directed by women, where women's pleasure is the focus. There are lots of women who really respond with an increase in interest in sex after watching that. So, I think the important take home message here is we need to really pay attention to what are the things that pull out my interest in sex, and actually what are the things that are no longer working, right?
Yeah, that's great.
And then start to implement those in our life.
And you mentioned the word confidence earlier. So confidence plays such a key role in that, because maybe you are asking for things or asking for new things for the first time.
Yeah.
Many women are, right? So it takes
Yeah.
that level of confidence and comfort, and knowing that you deserve it.
Yeah. And I'll say one thing about that, Shirley, and that is it's okay to be in a really long-term relationship and have never talked about sex and start talking about it in your 50s or 60s or later, whatever the age is. So that's another myth we want to debunk. The myth being, my partner should just know what I like.
Hey, did you catch that? That was a giant permission slip that Dr. Brotto just handed to you. Here's your permission slip. Ask for what you want.
Yeah.
Ask for what you need. So, how long has you and your team been working on this initiative and the research? And what was the most surprising thing you learned?
So the campaign really focuses on two big studies that we led out of my lab at UBC. One of the studies was really to look at the impact of daily stress, also stress hormones, and to what extent do the hormones versus the daily stress and life events contribute to women's levels of desire. And we had two different groups, women who reported having difficulties with desire and women who didn't. And I think one of the really, really important findings from that was that daily stress, the day-to-day grind, the continual to-do list can actually be more harmful, not only for our sex lives, but for our brains, fundamentally for our brains, than, say, a single traumatic event.
Wow.
And I think we have grown into such a culture where we normalize being, I'm so busy, I'm so busy, I'm so busy, I'm a great multitasker, I can juggle all of these things at the same time. Well, the reality is that it takes a toll on our brains, on our bodies, and absolutely on our sexual desire. I think we were expecting that going into the study, but the findings really verified that when we look at the contribution of some of the hormonal factors and some of those life stress factors, is just how important those life stress factors were. So part of Debunking Desire campaign is to take those findings, share it with women, not as a way to depress them, but rather as a way of saying, this actually is something that's somewhat in your control. And surely you know me when I talk about the kind of fallacy of multitasking. None of us multitask. It's a myth. None of us can multitask. We can serially task, focus on one thing at a time. But this idea of being able to do everything all at the same time is really problematic for us, and for our sex lives. And then so the second study that Debunking Desire is really aimed to share the findings of was a study of mindfulness as a tool. And you held up my book, and the book talks about some of the research we've done. This is real, folks. This is legit. This is not just breathe your problems away. The brain changes when we practice mindfulness meditation, and it changes in a way that can directly impact sexual desire. So the second big study that we did was really evaluating that. How well does it work? We followed women for a year after they participated in our mindfulness program, and it worked. It worked profoundly, and it continued to show benefit even a year after women participated in the mindfulness program.
Wow. 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 I'm just going to go back to the point you made a minute ago about that it's in our control, and, we have the ability to make it a priority. It reminds me of a conversation I had with Debbie Brown, who is a registered nurse and hormone balance expert that I went to see when I was navigating my own journey. And I sat down with her, and of course I presented, Debbie, anxiety, depression, sleep deprivation, brain fog. And she's like nodding at like classic, classic, classic. And then she looked up at me and said, "And what about libido?" And I was like, oh yeah, like wasn't even on my list.
Yeah.
And I don't know about the folks that have joined us tonight. I'm assuming it's on your list if you've made a point of taking time out of your busy lives and, coming and learning from Lori tonight. But for many women, it's become, as you mentioned, one of the things that falls right to the bottom of all those other multitasking responsibilities. How do we raise the flag?
Yeah.
How do we bring focus to it?
Oh,
and what are the benefits of doing so?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start there with what are like the why. Why bother trying to work on it? And I'll acknowledge that for a lot of women, they may have had difficulties with sexual desire or sexual pain or difficulties with lubrication for years or even decades. And so it's heartbreaking to hear their stories of the loss and the mourning and really the impact on their life. But it's never too late. It's not the case that, if you've had difficulties for 30 years that you can't reverse those with some concrete skills in place. So there's another myth, right? There's another myth that goes on out there. It's never, yeah. So why do we do that? Sexual health is kind of integrated into so many aspects of our life. The World Health Organization defines sexual health as a fundamental part of quality of life. And we know that because when someone has difficulties with sexuality, it impacts their sense of self. It impacts their mood. It impacts their relationships. It impacts their ability to focus. So we see what happens when there are ongoing chronic difficulties with sexual satisfaction. It affects all of the different domains. Those are just some of the psychological ones, not to mention the physiological ones. And this has been shown in scientific study after study after study that individuals, women in particular, who have difficulties with desire are far more likely to have poor health, to report lower life satisfaction, to report lower relationship satisfaction. And so all of these things tend to go together at the same time. And so it's an important part of quality of life. We wouldn't ignore other arguably more medical parts
Right.
of our health. So why are we ignoring our sexual health? I can tell you why we're ignoring it, because there's still a stigma that follows sexuality around, especially for women and especially for perimenopausal and menopausal women, where, there's maybe this quickness to label one as, quote, I'm going to use this word only once and I won't use it again, but I have to say it because I hear it so often, nymphomaniac, right?
Oh.
If I talk to my doctor about my difficulties with desire, will I be labeled as a nymphomaniac? By the way, that was an old medical term that was used to diagnose women.
Which is rooted in fear and shame.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely. Yeah. So coming back to the main question, it's a fundamental part of health. So we need to own that. And so if we do that, then it means we're more likely to pay attention to it. We're more likely to get the resources or ask for help, to talk to a family doctor, to get the evidence-based booked, maybe even to read the science, and to quickly learn that there are solutions for women.
That's great. Okay. So because it's a fundamental part of our health for all women, I'm going to jump to one of the questions that we got from one of our members in advance. And that is, how do I manage my desire when I am single?
Oh, great question. And I try to be careful in my language
Mhm.
around not associating desire with just being in a monogamous long-term relationship. Desire affects everybody,
Right.
unless one identifies as asexual, and that's a very legitimate sexual orientation. So when one is single, I guess maybe the question could be, what happens if my desire is low and I'm single? I'm guessing that might be what the question is how do I manage it there? If that is the question, that is a challenge, because one might not be motivated
Right.
to date, to maybe put themselves deliberately in situations that could lead to something sexual. And so sexual desire, the big surveys that look at how common low desire is in women, find that it impacts partnered women and single women equally. So there's another myth. Single women have ample low desire, or sorry, have ample desire. They don't. Single women, if they're impacted by stress or medical factors, can also be plagued with low desire. So it can be a unique challenge for the woman who's not in a relationship, but a lot of the strategies that we use for partnered women work just as well.
Right.
Some might argue even better in single women, because you sort of remove the influence of the relationship and sometimes the
Hmm.
conflict that goes along with that.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay. You guys that are watching, you've probably heard me say this before, but I'm going to jump in because it's related to potentially the single question, but also a partnered question. A couple of years ago, I was at a conference and I got asked the question, is there sex after menopause? And my response was yes, and sometimes even with a partner. Right?
Yes.
So it has nothing to do with whether you're in a relationship or you're not.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just really important, as Lori has
Yeah.
identified.
And Shirley, if I can say one more thing about this, I because I work in a medical school, I have the privilege often of giving talks to doctors, gynecologists, family doctors, and that's actually one of the really important take-home points that I convey to them, and that is, don't assume that the 80-year-old widowed woman who's seeking your care is not sexually active,
Right.
right? First of all, masturbation continues throughout the life. If a woman masturbates earlier on in her life, she's likely to continue that throughout. The other thing that we're actually seeing is for older women is an increase in sexual interest, in sexual desire, especially among women who are no longer in a relationship. So either if it's through divorce or through the passing of a partner, sometimes there can be a resurgence in desire. So loved your answer to that. Sex absolutely continues, and sometimes with a partner.
Awesome. Okay, I'm just going to address a couple of questions that we have here. Yes, this interview is being recorded, and so everyone who has registered in advance will get the link. And where do we want to go next? Lori, someone named Lori, spelled the same way as you, would like us to talk about moisturizing, vaginal moisturizing.
Yeah. Okay. So, super question. And maybe it's an opportunity also just to clarify terms as well,
Yeah.
because we've got moisturizers and we've got lubricants and they're different.
Exactly.
Both absolutely play a role, especially through the peri and postmenopausal period. So first of all, lubricants, lube, in other words. I recommend lubricants to all women, all life stages,
all the time.
All the time. If you want sex to feel better, and however you define sex, sex with a hand, sex with a partner, sex with whatever, use a lubricant. Now, there's quite an array of different lubricants that exist. And so without getting into recommending specific name brands, I would recommend go to your local female-friendly sex store. Here in Vancouver, we've got a few that are very trusted, and ask the question. The reason why it's important to get the right lubricant is if you're a woman who has any kind of vaginal condition, vaginal skin condition, or vulvar dermatosis, or a history of radiation on the vulva, we want to be really careful with the kind of lubricants that we recommend. Tend to be purely just water-based, totally organic. In the absence of those issues, there's more kind of leeway to choose different lubricants, and a lot of personal preference comes in. I think one thing I will say about lubricants is try and avoid the ones with added fragrances and flavors. They're just irritants on your skin. Keep the vulva nice and clean. Don't need to add anything extra to it. So that's a lubricant, and there's actually been some great research looking at how common use of lubricants is in North America, and they're super common. A lot of women use lubricants. I'd love to see the number go up even higher, where all women are using lubricants. Moisturizer, on the other hand, Shirley, you could probably answer this question because I know you have a lot of expertise in this area as well. So I'll just say something briefly about moisturizers, and that is that they tend to be reserved for women through the peri and postmenopausal period. They tend to be more often than not intravaginal, and they're really intended to increase the elasticity of the vaginal wall directly in response to vaginal dryness. And so the dryness arises because of the drop in estrogens that happen through peri and postmenopause. And it means that those walls of the vagina don't kind of elasticate as much as they used to, and it can give rise to pain for women and even some tearing. So moisturizers can help offset that. And there's different kinds of moisturizers, different brands of moisturizers, and again are typically not used by premenopausal women, unless of course that premenopausal woman is breastfeeding. And with breastfeeding, we know that there's a drop in estrogen, and it can actually be quite painful and dry in the vagina and vulva. So often gynecologists will recommend a moisturizer also for those women.
Absolutely. And I'll add one more thing to that, which I learned through this research journey I'm on with vaginal moisturizer, and that is the birth control pill, which is like a bad joke. But women, if you're on the pill, can also experience vaginal dryness.
Yeah.
So moisturizing, very important for so many reasons. And we could do a whole other webinar on that. So come back to the Menopause Chicks community and find out more information on that. You touched on the word conversation. We've got a couple of questions about how to have a conversation with your doctor. And we have another question about how to have a conversation with your partner about desire.
Yeah. So, there's been so much research that looks at how often do women talk to their healthcare providers when they have a difficulty with desire. And the data show that the vast majority of women do not. So only 30% of women who have a chronic low desire will talk to their primary care doctor about it. That means 70% of women are pretty much suffering in silence.
Is that because they expect their doctor to ask them?
Yeah, so there's also been studies to try and unpack that. And there's both woman factors and there's provider factors. Some of the
Okay.
woman factors are just as you said, that, my doctor only has 10 minutes.
Yeah.
If it's that important, my doctor will bring it up. Women are embarrassed. They are concerned about their doctor's perception of them, especially if the doctor is the same doctor for their partner and their other family members. So there's a lot of reluctance to do that. Healthcare providers, on the other hand, similarly do not bring it up, and they should be. Family doctors, if you're doing an annual wellness exam, that should be a routine question, which is, do you have any concerns about your sexual health? It's kind of broad and open enough. It doesn't insinuate partnered status. It doesn't insinuate how much activity you're having, and they should be asking. One of the number one reasons that doctors provide for not asking those questions is because they feel like they're inadequately trained to respond if the person says, yes, I have problems. And that's probably true, because when
Right.
we look at medical school training, there's very few medical schools in Canada, across the whole country, that actually include training in sexual health as part of a medical school curriculum. So most doctors are not getting trained in how to do this. So we need to do better there. There's definitely some institutions. Thankfully, my home, UBC, does an awesome job training their young docs on how to ask about sexuality and talking about it within the lens of kind of general quality of life.
Okay.
So now to your question, Shirley, about how do you bring this up? Rehearse ahead of time, look in front of the mirror, practice. One of the things that I often say to women as a kind of way to ease your way in is to say either to your doctor or to your partner, I heard this thing on the radio, or I read this thing in the
Yeah.
paper, or I saw this documentary on TV and it talked about sexual health and it got me thinking, and you sort of can ease your way into that. So it gives you a bit of permission to have the conversation that way. And women have come back to me and said it's a strategy for them that works really, really well. I think there's no easy way to do it if you are someone that has been kind of holding secrets or suffering in silence for a long time. But we know problems tend to not go away on their own without really talking about them.
Yeah, that's true. And one of the things that we talk about in the Menopause Chicks community is building your midlife health team. So if this is a conversation that you're maybe struggling with, I know
Yeah,
early on, I remember a good friend of mine saying just something she couldn't bring up with her doctor. They
yeah,
like friends for
yeah,
30 years, but there's nurse practitioners,
yeah.
there's other sexual health experts, or there could be someone on your health team that could serve as a bridge to
Yes,
getting to the help that you need. Maybe it's your
love that.
pharmacist, right?
Yeah,
It could
yeah,
be, just someone in your community. It's not just your doctor and
yes,
or suffer in silence. You have
yeah.
choices.
Love that.
Yeah.
So great. And it's particularly true since sexual health cuts across so many domains of our health, right? So I know a few chiropractors who've had
Yeah.
fantastic sexual health training. Why? Because the alignment of the bones in your body can
Yes.
impact pain during sex.
Right.
And so I think that's terrific advice.
Cool, cool, cool. Okay, so the other conversation question that we received was, how can I crack open this conversation with my partner? Um,
Yeah. I mean, it could be the same way. It
yeah,
could be, I read, I heard, I saw. It could be, sometimes I've had heard from many women that they might deliberately go to one of the expos on sexuality. So, for example, here in Vancouver, there's a great sex trade show. You know how you can go to a trade show for home and garden or buying a boat? Well, guess what, folks? There's trade shows focused on sex.
what's the date of that?
It's actually this month in January. It's called the Taboo Sex Show, and it's great. And it's, different booths and vendors. It really is about kind of normalizing the
Right on.
conversation around sexuality. So that's one way that's kind of fun. Sometimes it can be folded into the language of physical health, right? So in the course of having a conversation about, say, a pain that one has, a back pain, maybe easing into, I've noticed that when I'm in pain, it really affects my ability to have sex in a satisfying and pleasurable way. And because it's so important to me and important to us in our relationship, I want to talk to you about it. So I think, there is no one recipe for how to bring it up, but it's so crystal clear that if we can really talk about sex in a way that normalizes it, that in a way that demystifies it, in a way that gives ourselves and our partner permission to explore it and enjoy it and seek pleasure in it, that directly affects desire. The big surveys also consistently find that women with low desire are far more likely to not talk about sex with their partners than the women with happy levels
Okay.
of desire. So those are highly correlated, right? So maybe it's the case that when we don't talk about sex with a partner, we don't ask for what we want. We receive touches and stimulations that hurt. And then therefore that directly affects our interest and motivation to continue to be sexual. And you kind of get into this vicious cycle.
Yeah.
So there's health benefits even from communicating about sex. So many reasons. So let's debunk that one, that
Totally.
talking about sex is wrong or dirty or harmful or my partner will leave me. The data simply just do not support that at all.
And I'm sure that you talk to many men in your work as well. I've heard a lot of feedback from men, husbands, partners who say, I was so relieved when she told me, when she explained that it wasn't me. It wasn't that she doesn't love me anymore. It was that her body's going through changes. Like, it's like that, opening up the honesty bucket and the relief and the benefits to the relationship as a result of that.
Yeah. I do have the pleasure of, in the course of work as a therapist, is I meet, if it's a couple that comes in, I meet with both of them. I meet with them together, I meet with them individually. And I always ask a partner, what are your beliefs about kind of the reasons of her low desire? And in the case of the male, if the partner's a male, he will say, I'm convinced she's not attracted to me. She doesn't
Right.
love me anymore. Maybe she's interested in someone else. Maybe this is a sign that the relationship is going to end. And so he's kind of going through his own set of myths and irrational beliefs because there's no other evidence to challenge those. So to be able to have a conversation and reassure one that it's not about any of those things. It's about, these other things or this other thing, or I really don't know what the cause is, but I can assure you it's not because I'm, interested in ending the relationship. So powerful. I've seen partners cry right in front of me when that revelation is made. So again, comes back to the importance of
Yeah,
communication.
and sometimes we have to separate ourselves from what we're going through. Like, I wouldn't hesitate to tell my partner that I have a cold or the flu.
Right.
So I don't need to hesitate to
Right.
tell my partner that, my desire is low right now because XYZ, or, I'm going through vaginal dryness, but I've found a solution and I'm
Yeah.
really looking forward, in a couple of weeks to feeling better,
Yeah. So great.
explain it. Okay. A few specific questions. We were expecting that maybe a question would come up around hormones, and this particular member did go through fertility treatment. So she had hormone injections, and she said that her libido has never been the same.
Yeah.
Any comments or feedback for her?
Yeah. So, it's tricky to unpack that because in the case of infertility treatments, there's a lot of different things happening at the same time, right? There's a desire for fertility, and sometimes that can become very all encompassing and
Right.
self-consuming. So there's that. Sometimes there's a struggle with feelings of loss or inadequacy, or questioning one's femininity, etc. All kinds of beliefs around what's wrong with me. And sometimes that can be perpetuated by messages that the woman hears from the outside as well, sometimes even from a partner. And then on top of that, Boy, infertility treatment is hard work. It is hard work. And we
Exhausting.
do not give women the credit that they deserve, even for attempting to go through the treatments, the hormonal roller coasters that women go through, the physical changes. If a woman is successful and is able to achieve a pregnancy, sometimes the typical pregnancy symptoms are even stronger than through a quote, more natural pregnancy. And so there's all of these things that are happening at the same time. So in the case of this woman whose desire has never really come back, it could be a combination of all of those things that have happened, not just one thing, not just the hormonal changes. If the outcome was a pregnancy and the outcome was a baby, well, guess what? Being a parent, it's going to take a toll on your desire for many years. So, now, the good news is that it almost doesn't matter the cause of the low desire. The strategies tend to be the same, right? So we want to eliminate the things that are getting in the way. We want to make sure that women are communicating about their needs to a partner. We want to make sure they're prioritizing it. We want to make sure they're planning sex at a time when they're most awake. We want to make sure that they're practicing good self-care, that they're eliminating as many stressors as possible, that they're practicing mindfulness. So again, it's okay to not be able to go back and point your finger on exactly the cause of it. For a lot of women, they simply can't. But again, the strategies would be expected to work just the same. So I would invite you listening to have the conversation. If you trust your healthcare provider enough to ask the questions and find out what the next appropriate steps would be for you.
Awesome. So for anyone who may be joining us a little bit later, Lori, you mentioned mindfulness. Maybe can you expand upon that? And we have a question from a member who wants to know, is the program, which I think they're referring to, the mindfulness program, available on your website?
Okay, so what is mindfulness? I mean, meditation has been around for 4,000 plus years. It's nothing new. What's new is our ability to study it as scientists. And so that's much newer. It's only been in the last 40 or so years. The study of mindfulness meditation as a tool for sexual desire is very new. In fact, it started in 2003 when I started to do this research as Shirley, as a postdoc fellow at the University of Washington. So it's much newer. So what do we mean by mindfulness? It can be distilled down to present moment, non-judgmental awareness. Basically, what it entails is concentration training, paying attention. But it's not just about paying attention willy-nilly. It's about paying attention in a compassionate way to yourself. Mm-hmm. So if you're listening to this conversation and you're really focusing, it means if you're having bad thoughts, negative judgments, to us, to thoughts you have, you just acknowledge them and let them be. Right? You don't kind of incorporate them. You don't run with them. So mindfulness as a practice is a set of very specific structured skills. So when we teach this in our groups, we guide women through the practices, and then we send them home with audio recordings and encourage them to practice these at home. And we've been studying this for a while now in different populations of women, and it works. And I do say that with confidence because the science is there to back it up. We continue to run groups out of our program at Vancouver Hospital and UBC. Right now, we're doing a study focused on breast cancer survivors, and where women either will participate in a mindfulness group or they'll participate in a group that delivers just sex education and information about cancer and sexual desire. We know both of those work. What we're really interested in studying now is what works best for whom. Who are the women that would benefit more from a mindfulness versus an education-only route? So those groups are ongoing. They're free. If you're in BC and interested in participating, definitely get in touch. We're trying to get as many breast cancer survivors to participate as we possibly can. So Yeah. And so, I mean, part of the reason I wrote the book, the main reason was to take the science and share it with the public. The other reason I wrote the book is so that it can function a little bit as a guide, as a self-help guide that women can read through and practice the exercises at home on their own. And so many of the exercises that we actually ran in our groups are described in detail in the book.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And thank you for doing that. And you mentioned breast cancer. We have a question about surgery. So coming back from surgery, maybe
Yeah.
bladder repair surgery or a hysterectomy.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that for a minute?
Yeah. So, I mean, if the question is, can that impact my sexuality and my
I think
sexual
it's
desire?
how do I
Oh,
come back from
how
surgery?
I see, how do
Yeah.
I come back? Well, first and foremost, you have to make sure that your body has recovered in an ample way, so that there's no risk of damaging the site, the incision site. Depends on how the surgery was done, if it was laparoscopic or not. So that's really, really important, is that we don't kind of prematurely jump to activities that could be dangerous for us. That said, let me debunk another myth while we're at this. The myth being that intercourse, aka penis and vagina sex, is, sorry folks, yep, I said penis and vagina in the same sentence, that's the only way to have sex, and it's not.
Right.
Touching, oral pleasure, manual stimulation, bodies caressing, watching an erotic film with a partner, all of those are on the sexual buffet.
Eye contact.
Eye contact, sharing stories, sharing fantasies, role play. There's so many things that count within the umbrella of sexual activity. It's not just intercourse. And so a lot of those activities
Right
wouldn't be impacted by one surgery, by what have you, et cetera. And there's lots of things that get in the way of intercourse. Chronic back pain, which 30% of Canadians have on a constant basis, can make intercourse really, really painful, if not intolerable altogether. And what I say to couples I work with is, great, what's next on the menu, right? We eliminated that. Lots of other appetite. If this is a tapas, move on to the next thing. So kind of two-part answer to that question. Sometimes what I see is this kind of emphasis on waiting X amount of weeks, and then the weeks have gone by and suddenly one is given the green light to go ahead, and they struggle. It's painful, it's not pleasurable, and then they feel defeated after that.
Which happens postpartum. It's like that,
Completely.
right? 6 week
Completely.
mark, and suddenly you're supposed to see bells and whistles.
Right. Well, you've got a baby that's right beside you, sleeping in the bassinet. Yeah. So if we can kind of change how we think about sexual activity as being far broader than just that one act, then it means we can continue to be sexual regardless of all the different life changes and stages we go through.
That's a really good point. And there's another member who wanted to know about the impact of pelvic floor physiotherapy, and how can that support us on this journey?
Yeah. So I don't know how many of your listeners and viewers, Shirley, are aware that there is a subspecialty of physiotherapy.
We've put out a challenge to everyone to book an appointment this year.
Yeah, amazing. I can't, that pelvic floor physios should be on all of our roster of health professionals that we work with.
I'm tomorrow at 10 a.m.
Ah, good. Good.
I'm recording it.
Oh, you're recording the session?
I'm recording it.
Love it. That's debunking.
That's a sidebar. Okay. Pelvic floor physiotherapy.
Yeah. So pelvic floor physiotherapists are absolutely a critical member of the team if there is any amount of pain, so vulvar or vaginal pain, if there's incontinence, if there's prolapse, if there's bladder issues. Often women after a pregnancy, regardless of the mode of delivery, will have changes in their pelvic floor. Sometimes changes in pelvic floor can result in a too loose pelvic floor, one that doesn't kind of sustain the organs, and can result in prolapse, can result in incontinence. Sometimes the pelvic floor is too tight and can produce symptoms that we call vaginismus. But basically what it is women will say it feels like their vagina has closed up. There's a wall there and nothing will go inside. So whether it's a too tight or a too loose pelvic floor physiotherapists are critical for helping that. And yes, they need to get to the muscles, and there's only two ways to get to those muscles through the vagina or through the anus. Very, very effective, has been studied in scientific studies, and can be extremely effective. Of course, women have to continue to do the practices on their own.
Right.
So for women who have vulvovaginal pain, and that's affecting their interest in sex, or it's affecting their ability to reach orgasm, or it's affecting, sexual pain or pleasure, pelvic floor physios are so crucial as part of the recovery.
Okay. And so she just followed up, can it help desire? And I think you've just explained that. Yes, it can. It's
Yeah.
like a stepping stone, right?
Yeah. Sometimes it's not the case that we've lost desire for sex, but we've lost desire for the sex we're having. And so if the sex we're having is painful, not pleasurable, inadequate lubrication, then let's change the mechanics of sex.
That's so good.
And desire follows.
So good. Okay, lots of questions on where people can buy your book. I assume it's on Amazon and chapters.
It's both. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. So they're excited. We haven't touched on this, but it came up a couple of times in some of our pre-questions, and that was high desire. So I think for the most of the questions, and maybe a lot of our conversation tonight was, addressing perhaps lower desire and wanting to get it back. But many women do experience higher desire at different stages of their life.
Completely.
Comments?
Oh, so many. So let's debunk the idea that if your desire is higher than your partner's, that you are a sex addict. That is not the first conclusion we want to draw, that you're a sex addict. So oftentimes there's a discrepancy within a relationship between the two individuals' levels of desire. More often than not, if it's a heterosexual couple, it tends to be in the direction of his desire is higher and her desire is lower. But sometimes those are flipped, where her desire is higher relative to his. If he has changes in his androgen levels or testosterone, or has had prostate cancer, or has had any number of medications or other issues that lowered his testosterone levels, it can dramatically impact his level of desire. Now, her level of desire may have stayed the same, but relative to hers seems high. So it becomes really important, if a woman is concerned about her desire being too high, is to ask the question, is this just relative to my partner's, or is this entirely self-referential compared to my past levels of desire? That's critical. So the second thing that as a clinician we ask is, does your high desire interfere in your life? Are you missing work to masturbate? Are you excessively viewing pornography in a way that feels obsessive and compulsive? Are you paying for a lot of sex and kind of using, financial means to do that? In other words, is this kind of a really clinically significant issue? If that is the case, then I'd highly recommend talking to an expert in sex therapy and sexual health with experience dealing with, out of control sexual behaviors or sex addiction, whatever you want to call it. So that becomes really important, but in women, it's actually really rare. It's less than 1% of all women, so it's unlikely to be that. Now, the last thing that I'll say just really quickly about high desire is sometimes there are medications that can drive up desire purely physiologically. And so there's for some women, especially women who are really sensitive to certain medications, and it's not just one type of medications. So that might be something to look at as well, as what's been different in my life, in my health, in my medication that might be explaining this high desire at the same time.
Good point. So, some of the comments I've heard from women particularly post-menopause, is, and if it's not in one of those danger categories that you just described, it's embrace it. Because for many of us, it's the first time in decades where there haven't been kids around, or you're not worried about getting pregnant. So there, or thirdly, and maybe most importantly, you're putting your own name at the top of the to-do list. So
So true.
the higher desire might be new to you, but it might
Yeah.
also be an opportunity for you to embrace the next
Yeah.
new you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, words matter as we started out this
Right.
conversation. So can
Oh,
it be
definitely.
reframed as a reawakening of desire rather than a too high desire?
Exactly.
Right? Maybe
Exactly.
this is feeling desire for the first time in a really authentic way.
Yes. Yes. And maybe with a new partner
Yep.
too. Like there's lots of women who are reevaluating this stage of their lives,
Yeah.
and so new experiences across the board.
Yeah.
I can't believe it, Lori. We're like 5 minutes away from 7 o'clock.
No.
I knew this would
Okay.
go. I knew this would go. I want to share with everyone a couple of things. One, we are recording this, so there will be a link for you to watch again. We've had a couple of members who have watched with their husbands tonight, so I want to thank you for doing that. So this might be something that if you joined us tonight, you may want to share with others tomorrow or this weekend. And I know there's some questions and comments in the feed here that I just didn't have an opportunity to get to. So we will get to those in the next 24 hours. I'll work with Lori and her team. If I don't have the direct link to point you to, or the exact answer, we will do that. Lori, closing comments. What's the one message you'd like to leave everyone with tonight about debunking desire?
Only one, Shirley. There's so many, but I really will leave you with one, and that is, so amazing to have the viewers here share the information you learned with one other woman who was not able to be here.
Great.
And that is such a gift that you can give to someone else. And if you had to pick and choose a piece of information to share, choose one that really taps into some of the pervasive myths that continue to plague women, and just debunk that for her. Set her free from that. So that would be my one wish, is just to share something you learned with someone else.
That's awesome. And there's some great ways to do that as well. You can go to debunkingdesire.com, and Lori and her team have a Facebook account, a Twitter account, and an Instagram account, which is at UBCSHL. There's lots of great infographics and small information that, share it on your feed or send a direct message to someone tonight, and you can, learn or relearn some of this information with a friend. I think that's a really, really great piece of advice. I want to thank you, Lori, for being such a mentor and advocate and supporter of Menopause Chicks, for taking time. I know you've had a very busy day today. So thank you for taking the time to join us tonight, and for all the great work that you do. Quick plug. Tell us where you were today. Let's just talk about women's research for 1 minute.
Yeah. So, I really had the honor of sitting on a panel with other folks who are really passionate about women's health and women's health research. Today was Emanations, which is the BC Women's Health Foundation, big fundraiser. And the fundraiser is to support research in women's health. And, if healthcare is the train that brings us to health, research is the track. And it's so woefully underfunded. So today was an opportunity to really raise the importance of why doing research on women's health is critical for all of us, not just women, but really for all of society. So yeah, it's been an amazing day to reflect on that and to have this conversation with you now.
And nothing happens without the research. This doesn't happen. The website doesn't happen. The sharing and the conversations don't happen if it doesn't begin with women's health, quality women's health research. So thank you for the work that you do. Thanks to your team. for joining us. We're going to say good night and have a great sex life.
Thank you.